So this is the last step before assembly, generally, is painting your stuff. And if you've painted other types of materials, if you've done foam, if you've done Worbla, this is very much the same thing. It's a dry brushing technique to get you this nice gold metallic effect. The best paint I've found for this is an acrylic. The brand is Golden Fluid Acrylics, which is really misleading because not all their stuff is golden. There's also golden oils, and I wish they'd call themselves something else. But Golden Fluid Acrylics is the brand name. Iridescent Bronze Fine, and that is number 2450, is the thin body, as opposed to the thicker stuff that gives you kind of texture in the paint itself, rather than paint just taking the texture of your item. And it's iridescent bronze. They have a gold, but it's much more gold. This tends to look more realistic, more natural. You get a really good gold effect with this stuff, to the point where people tend to look through my portfolio and they're like, wow, that's not leather. I'm like, yeah, that's leather. A guy got mad once because he ordered a Wonder Woman tiara and then was surprised to find that it was leather. But if you are not going to work with this brand, this is artist acrylics. You can find them at Blake University Art, any specialty art store. You generally can't find them at craft stores, but you can find them at art stores. An alternative to this stuff is Jacquard Lumiere. It is a brand that is intended for fabrics, because what you're looking for here, the key points and what's going to make a good paint for this application, is very thin body, very dense pigment, and very small pigment. Because if it's large pigments suspended in the painting medium that are not particularly dense, it's going to look like glitter when it spreads across this. You're not going to get the solid gold effect. You're going to get kind of glitter scattered across this black. And it also needs to be able to dry flexible. That's very important because leather is a flexible medium. If you've worked with foam before and you painted the top coat with a paint that was not flexible, then you know that as soon as you try to bend it, the top coat will crack. So Jacquard Lumiere is a good one for this if you're not going to use this stuff. I think the Jacquard is a little bit cheaper, but this bottle is maybe like 20 bucks, and I have had to buy new bottles of those very infrequently. Like, I can count on one hand the number of times I've had to replace those bottles, and I do this a lot. So it'll get you quite far. They also sell it in a smaller version. This cap is not what it comes with. I found that the cap that it does come with tends to get a lot of crud buildup on the outside, which is of course all wasted. So I got this little thing at Tap Plastics and just swapped it out. It makes it much easier. I apply it with a paintbrush. Stiff, relatively coarse bristles is what I found works best. But you can use whatever you like. So this is actually my little palette. It's a piece of plastic that's been taped to the marble. And if any of it gets on the marble, you can just clean it up afterwards with rubbing alcohol. So this is a dry brushing technique, which means you are getting only a very small amount of paint on the brush and brushing it very lightly just to hit the raised surfaces, because there's basically two ways to do the weathered metallic effect. You can have a black base coat or a dark base coat and then dry brush very lightly over the top, and it'll look like there's crud stuck in the crevices. Or you can spray paint the whole thing entirely with your metallic color and then go in with a wash. Very similar to the highlights we use, a kind of a watered down acrylic black that you glop over the whole thing. It's very, very watery, so it gets into all the little crevices, and then you wipe off the excess. This is what I've found works best. It's kind of time consuming, but I really like the effect. So if it ain't broke, don't fix it. No order of operations here, just paint it until it is done. As you can see, I've already painted some of the other things. I'm just going to show you the techniques for doing various parts of it on this, and then it will be ready to go. hair on it. Alright, so doing this stuff first. No reason. Get a small amount, but a very fresh amount on the brush. And this is one of the things that works best when the paint is very fresh on the brush. It'll dry out. This stuff dries very quickly, which is a benefit because it means that I can forget which parts were newest and put fingerprints on it and not have to worry about messing up my paint job. So very small dabbing motions, because you don't want to get it inside all of that little texturing. You want to get it just over the surface, and you want it to be quite bright, which is why you want to do this when you have just dabbed paint on the brush. There are other things where you want the paint to be a little bit drier. So, for example, it's dried out a little bit. Doing this motion for hitting the darker of the blocks, because you are going to hit all of the triangles. Just some of them are going to be darker than others. So you get the idea for that. And if you do get it, if you apply it a little bit too heavy, if you have too much paint on the brush when you're doing this step, it's gonna give you a blob of solid gold. Once you do that, you really can't get it out. So you're gonna have to add some other blobs elsewhere to make it look like it's a natural random part of the pattern. Because it needs to be random but also uniform. So if you've got some blobs that are darker and some blobs that are lighter, just go ahead and add a couple more so that it looks like natural variation. Okay, so that's done. Pretend I did that all the way around. Now for the triangles. The ones that are points toward the outside are going to be painted solid gold. These are the raised ones. And there is really no trick to this one. You just get used to getting most of the color on the raised one and some of it on the compressed ones. So it'll go like that. You see a little bit is brushing off onto that one, but that's okay. You'll still get plenty of contrast between the triangles that are adjacent to each other. And if you have lots of experience with painting foam, this is absolutely the same thing. At this point, there is no difference between leather and any other medium. Acrylic paints like this are really good for doing textured sections and very dense decorations, very dense designs. On surfaces where it's a big flat surface, such as the top side of that part, such as these big triangles or these open spaces here, you're going to need to hit it with more than one coat in order to get very solid coverage. So, and just keep that in mind. So, when you're doing the lighter streaks on the black triangles, and the same goes for hitting these little scales, because the scales are going to be darker than the surrounding area. Make sure that your brush strokes are going in the same direction. So you always want them going all in the same direction, because it'll come out kind of streaky. And same thing goes for these. Just do them top to bottom. And for these little streaky bits, you want to make sure that you don't have much on the brush at all, and it's a little bit dry by that point. If you are working on a large project, you'll find that because this stuff dries out so quickly, you wind up with little crud stuff on the brush. The way I clean the brushes is just with rubbing alcohol in a little spice bottle. You can rub it up in there to soften the paint crud, and then wipe off the buildup with a paper towel. This is also how I clean the brush after I'm done working with it. Rubbing alcohol will evaporate quickly, so remember to cap it again. Okay. So I would have to hit those triangles with a second coat You might not be able to tell from the camera, but when you get it in certain lights, it's very clear where the paint is thinner than in other places. Alright, same goes for the edges. You can do them very quickly, but you're going to need to do 2 coats. Doesn't matter if the first coat is streaky. You just want to make sure that the second coat has the brush strokes going the direction you want. This kind of paint doesn't leave very noticeable brush strokes, but they will be there very subtly, and you don't want them kind of mashed up all over the place. I really like this black base coat because it gives you a very nice smooth inside. I always feel like it looks kind of unprofessional when you've got a piece where the top looks just fine, but then when you're getting flashes of the underside, it's, you know, completely undyed and kind of streaky and janky looking. Alright, and it's already dry enough for me to put the second coat on the edge there. It'd be dry enough for me to put the second coat on the triangles too, obviously, because this stuff dries very quickly. But, okay. For doing the scales, you do the same thing as you did with the triangles, just these very long, streaky motions. And then you will just fill in all the space around it. And this is kind of time consuming, because you are going to also have to hit it with the second coat. Any of these areas that are flat, that are not textured, are going to need 2 coats. It's one of the nice things about the Wonder Woman set, because all of the blank expanses of it have been textured. Just this kind of... I use Dremelled mallet, rubber mallet for this, that's got all these little pock marks, and it just makes this kind of bumpy, weathered texture. And that picks up paint a whole lot better than these smooth areas do. Okay, so in the interest of time, we're going to pretend I did that whole thing on camera, and I'm going to give you a brief run through of how I do kind of a quality control. So when you got a piece, you think it's done, you're like, yay, good. What to do to make sure that it's actually all good and done. Hit it from multiple angles with the light so that you can see, because this will definitely make thinner patches of the coat stand out, paying special attention to the flat areas. The textured areas, it's really easy to hide if you've got a little bit of an uneven paint job, but on the flat expanses, it doesn't hide anything. So, do that. Multiple angles. If you've got a textured section, look at it, make sure that you don't have any darker patches. And if you have a patch, like this part is a little bit brighter than the surrounding area, and that there. So maybe add another couple little bright patches, because you want it to be uniform across the whole way. And then make sure that all of your edges are done. So go entirely around the piece, making sure edges are done, and then kind of hold it back and make sure that you've got overall coherence. And if you've got a second piece, make sure they match. You do it until it is done, and then don't forget to clean your brush with this stuff.